Good evening, Rabbi Moskowitz. How's everything this week with TribeHerald?
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. Good evening to you as well, my friend.
So this week we've been looking forward to the inauguration. We've been looking forward. We look back on the chaos at the Capitol building, and now we look forward, to the inauguration. What are some of your thoughts on what we're on this transition of power that we're about to go through?
It's been a very difficult time, and transitions are difficult. It's neither here nor there. Yesterday on MLK Day, I was listening to his speech that he gave at Stanford on the other America. And one of the things that he reflected on was how things in his time were better even 10 years earlier because people fought for certain legislation, they achieved it, and they stopped fighting. And I think what's the most important message is this is just the beginning. Not only do we need to undo all of the negative, but now we're in a position to actually replace it with something that's positive. So it's important to chase the joy and to catch up to it and to enjoy in the moment the sense of the success of getting people to vote and winning a free election and having that be able to manifest in a transfer of power, God willing, a peaceful transfer of power tomorrow. But that doesn't mean that it's over. It means that it's just beginning, and that we really need to think about what does it look like to make the most good in the world, and to use this opportunity to both replace the negativity and also to create much more positivity.
How should we relate to people who may be on that side of the fence or who may have been Trump supporters? How do we still try to maintain that spirit of unity with people who may be so diametrically opposed?
It's a struggle because historically, people who saw the world differently were able to come together and recognize that the other was misguided, but they both wanted the same thing. It was just a function of how to get there. For example, every single sane human wants children to go to school and be safe and not have to worry about gun violence. If you're not worried about that, if you don't think that kids should be safe, then should be locked up. There are people who think the way to make the streets and schools safe is to have more guns on the street. There are others that think, no, it's important to have fewer guns. People can disagree on an approach to get to a desired effect when people both want the same thing to happen, which is for children to be safe, for the streets to be safe. So then you can say, listen, I think you're an idiot because your perspective is ridiculous. And you can have a debate with somebody to say, I think you're foolish or misguided, but I can still respect that what you want to achieve is what I want to achieve. We just think there's different ways of getting there. That's really different than when a person says, I think the world is flat.
Right.
So okay. So don't go on a boat. But I don't think, so in thinking about, is it worth having a conversation with somebody like that? It's not worth it for me in that I don't need to hear their feelings. I don't need to hear their perspective. I don't need to think more broadly about maybe being open-minded enough to be able to accept a person's truth that the world is flat. I don't need that. But that person might need to hear from many people that the world's not flat, that the world is round, and why we know that the world is round. And if one person doesn't convince them, perhaps another, and perhaps it's the third or the fourth. But to never engage with somebody who sees things differently, it doesn't help that person. And I think it's important to recognize that not every conversation is for my own erudition. It's not only for me. So part of the work of being an ally is to say, listen, I understand that you don't understand this. And I understand that you think that there's a truth there that only you and the people who are in the shadows and in conspiracy groups think that you have access to. But they're actually really reasonable, intelligent, bright people that are saying differently. And if you're really open-minded, if you're really pursuing the truth, so then you should at least be open to hear what people have to say. But I think that it's really difficult. There's a beautiful allusion to the idea of separation in the process. The Talmud tells us that the order of Havdalah was established in Yavna. Havdalah is a ceremony that we separate the holiness of Shabbos to the mundane of the weekday. And Yavna was a city where we had a group of rabbis and scholars and sages that instituted many things. And it's also a play on words, that the word Yavna, even though it's a city, is also the order of Havdalah. There's Yayin, the wine, Besamim, the spices, Ner, the candle, and the Hay of Yavna is the Havdalah. And I heard from a Rabbi of mine once that this is also the way in which we're meant to engage with people. That when we think about the pursuit of the truth, so start with Start with getting a drink with somebody, tea, coffee, whatever it is. Come, let's grab something to drink. The yayin represents a social component. Let's come, we'll hang out. You'll see the goodness of this life of truth. If that doesn't work, maybe the besamim, show like the types of society that embrace a democracy, what we call soft power, right? Look, there's MTV, there's, whatever it is about the culture that says like, this is what happens when journalists can report. This is what happens when people can express themselves. If that doesn't do it, maybe the nair, the intellectual, the cerebral, like let's think about this statistically. Where are the places, right? What are the life expectancy? What's the way in which we can kind of show that the world, if you engage in a person to try to get them to see that there's a better world of being selfless, of giving for others, of caring and being compassionate. And if at the end of the day, the person says, yeah, but look, I only care about myself. I only want to make sure that I'm taken care of. And if that means at the expense of other people, right? So that so be it. So you say, okay, then like we actually can't be friends. You make a havdalah. But the havdalah, the separation comes after you try engaging in the different places. So our tradition says, separation is a last resort. Evil and goodness cannot coexist. But instead of trying to destroy the evil, we want to convert the evil. We want to elevate and shift. And that's the difference between Abraham and Noah. Noah says, look, I've got a ticket on the boat. I'm protected. I don't need to pray for the rest of the people. I don't need to engage. I'm taken care of. Because like there's evil in the world, let them be washed out. Abraham says about Sodom, but they're people, they're humans, they can be saved. Let's convert the masses. Let's try to get people to be good humans. And so he obviously debates with God. So I think that we're in that moment where we can either write people off and say, look, you're evil and you should go the way of the evilness, which is to be erased. Alternatively, we can say, listen, I understand that there's struggles. I understand there's temptations. I understand that in a cult-like space, there are people who are charismatic, that a person loses perspective. They lose their identity. They lose the ability to see things clearly. And nebuch, that happens. So we have a responsibility to try to save people. I know that sounds arrogant and obnoxious, and maybe, right? But that's the perspective. A person who thinks that the world is flat, a person that thinks that Trump is the Messiah, that somehow that he's this infallible role model, right? Of anything but the seven sins. Okay, so the person needs some help. So we can try to be there to help them. So I think trying to be compassionate, that there are good people who can get misguided, and each one of us has aspects of our lives that are a little bit clouded. We don't see with tremendous clarity. In the moment, we can feel confident. But as we get older, we can have a little bit of regret that maybe we weren't as aware as we thought we were. And that's something that we all need to internalize. But in terms of being able to, we start with an olive branch. We start with listen, I'm sorry that you voted for the other person. I know that you must be disappointed. That's real. There's an election, but when we think about democracy, everybody's a winner when you come together. So be the voice of the opposition. So go out and vote next time. So call your senator and your Congress people and say, listen, I want you to oppose this. That's part of the democracy, that you have a voice and you have a vote, and you get behind the person who got the most of those, but you don't lose your vote in the future, and you don't lose your voice. So be part of the democratic process and show up, but show up peacefully. And you feel like we're heading in the wrong direction. Okay, so be part of the process to steer us in the right direction. But there's a process. There was a way in which that way that happens. What we saw on January 6th, that's not democracy. That's not America. That's not America in terms of the best parts of it. That's clearly part of America. But I do deeply believe that trying to move people in the direction of good is always a better approach than trying to push them down further in the negative spaces.
One question that we had gotten on TikTok is, why does it cost so much to attend a synagogue? Why is it so expensive to be part of Jewish communal life? Should synagogues and other Jewish institutions make it a point to reach out more to lower income Jews? Yeah,
absolutely. A sanctuary is that. It's literally a safe space to be in relationship to God, and that we need to be able to provide access to anybody who wants to be in that space. And you have to be able to pay the bills. You have to keep the lights on. So there's definitely a shift in the model of like pay as you can, pay as you want type structures, as institutional Judaism becomes less relevant in relationship to kind of communal living in community, there are different models. People should be able to volunteer, should be able to contribute. Part of being in a community is a communal responsibility and contributing, but that should not at all mean limited to financial contributions. The rabbis tell us we're supposed to donate, excuse me, even tithe our time in community. And so there needs to be a shift that no one should ever be excluded from sacred space because of financial limitations, because sacred space belongs to the divine.
Right. Not to bring us back to politics, but a Jewish fraternity leader was just called out for being involved with a right-wing organization that sent people to a pro-Trump rally. And he defended his decision, and he defended his his connection to that organization. Is there an idea of, wanting to distance oneself from wicked people, or wanting to, not involve oneself with evil? How should we look at people like that? I'm sending people from my organization to go to this.
Yeah, the Mishnah says that we should always be careful to distance ourselves from a not good neighbor. And there are different interpretations. One is that you don't want to be influenced by that, right? The second is that if the neighbor's house gets, is a meth lab and it explodes, you don't want to be living next door. So there's something about proximity because of the negativity that comes. A person works in a perfume shop. Even if you don't buy anything, you leave smelling good because you're influenced by your surroundings. So too, a person is working in a place, that doesn't smell so good. So too spiritually. If a person is associated with somebody who is showing up to these places where people don't belong and are engaged in illegal activities, so a person needs to distance themselves, because, how do you know the next time that you're invited to one of their things, if they're not afraid of breaking the law in the middle of the day, in broad daylight, surrounded by police and, people live streaming, the same kind of body of Jewish law, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says that we need to be really thankful and pray for the welfare of the government. Because if people are not afraid of the government, right, and the police and the rules, then they'll eat each other up alive. And that's very true. What we saw in the middle of the day, right, where you have the President of the United States, right, encouraging a mob and inciting an insurrection, the brazenness of it, right? The Talmud speaks a lot about the difference between someone who comes in the middle of the night to rob and someone who comes in the middle of the day. Someone who comes at the middle of the night, okay, they're not afraid of God because God sees even at night. But they're afraid of the owners of the house. They want to come in the middle of the night when everybody's sleeping so they don't run into people. Person comes in the middle of the day, it means that they're not even afraid of running into a person. They're willing to kill. So to have such an attack on the sanctuary of democracy in the middle of the day, taking selfies, if you're not afraid of doing that, then what are you afraid of? And the audacity of not apologizing, of doubling down and trying to defend being part of an insurrection, I don't know. I mean, it's not a Jewish idea.
Do these sites make you more afraid as a Jew in America about rising power of anti-Semitism?
It doesn't make me more afraid. I think it's always been there. On the streets, even wearing a mask, I'm pretty identifiable as Jewish. And certainly since the Trump administration took over, I've personally felt, anti-Semitism much more. It wasn't infrequent. I used to be a rabbi in Harlem, and of the only synagogue there, and it was not infrequent that somebody would come up to me and say, hey, can you help me with my, rent this month, or, something like that. And I would say, hey, maybe you can help me with my rent this month, or like, hey, can you give me a job? Like, hey, can you give me a job? So, that's certainly increased, and for the most part, it's been nonviolent. Every so often, somebody tries to knock you over or something. But and even one time I was running to the governor's office for a meeting, and there were 3 separate incidences in the middle of the day in downtown New York of people saying anti-Semitic things to me. And so, like, it does. It's a microaggression, and it's exhausting, and for the most part, I don't feel threatened. It's just annoying. And it's a choice, right, to present as I present. That all being said, I don't feel more scared now. I think in a climate that doesn't tolerate it, it just suppresses it. And I think what we're seeing for the first time is a climate that doesn't suppress it, right? So being out with your tiki torches and your, you know, and the khakis, you don't have to wear a hood anymore. That's like a powerful shift. And the idea that the people are shocked now that they're losing their jobs because they rioted and looted, like they thought that they could go and take a selfie and there wouldn't be repercussions. That's because they're living in a dominant culture that's not afraid of being a racist, right? That's why they would wore hoods, right? Because like there were consequences of being out as a racist. One of the reasons why they wore hoods. So I hope that people feel like it's not safe anymore. But what I really hope is that we're able to recognize that it's always existed. It's not new. And the only thing that's new is that we're more aware of it. And so I hope that that invites people to do the work to make sure that it no longer exists. But, you know, faith is a really powerful thing. And if a person feels like they're walking with the divine, so then there's comfort in that. But, you know, I fear for those who don't have that level of comfort in the street, and there's a lot of work that needs to get done. But for me personally, I think I'm, you know, privileged and protected.
Baruch Hashem. Okay, until next week, thank you again.